Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
Scree Gear is more than apparel. It's a tribute to the relentless, the tireless, the true guardians of the wilderness. It's for those who seek not just a game, but a legacy. Not just a sport, but a way of life. In our gear, you're more than a hunter. You're a story, a tradition, a legend in the making. Scree is your journey, your triumph, your success. Join the working man revolution. Success awaits.
Well, all right. Welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass Podcast. Kevin and Chuck. Today, we're going to talk about warfare. Basically, the fighting techniques have changed throughout the years and kind of get into different things, and the world is definitely changing. Things aren't the way they used to be. There was a lot of cool stuff, with new ideas that kind of shape and change how we fight battles and how, how the winners get decided. It all depends on the tactics and new ideas and basically being able to adapt. And, I don't know if what the world brings. We see what's going on in Iran right now. And, I guess when the kids are at school, are they going to look out the window and see some kind of Red Dawn playing out? Iran may be more likely to do some kind of EMP weapon, something like that. They've made that threat a lot to us. We also have things like all the chaos and turmoil in Virginia. If you live in Virginia, it's kind of a big deal. They're getting a little bit worried about it. And, you kind of need to understand how to protect yourself, how to protect your family, how to keep things, safe. And, there's a lot of threats out there, and that's why we prepare. So, Kevin, basically, can you kind of take us through like the history of warfare? Like how has the natural progression kind of been? Like what are the changes?
Well, in 1984, West Point came up with a listing of types of warfare tactics.
Okay.
And first generation warfare is considered to be like that's fought with armies, with line and column tactics. So that would be, Romans and Greeks, straight up through more modern European warfare, like the American War for Independence was first generation warfare.
And even I think the other end of the spectrum of that, even like Braveheart, the big clashes. Right. And, even though it's all on, aggression and whatever, it's still just running right at the enemy,
Right. And it's basically a war that's fought with like massed armies,
throwing bodies at a problem. Right.
Yeah. Facing off in a field somewhere. Second generation warfare is more of a modern warfare. I think usually they consider the American Civil War as the first modern war.
Okay.
Now, that was, you could say Napoleon, the Napoleonic Wars were, but, it's not really. He had a lot to do with accurate artillery use,
all right,
which is a big part of it. But another big part was using more modern equipment, ironclad ships, artillery like Napoleon, like we had mentioned, and moving away from musket warfare, rifles, and
they got to line up for you to hit them.
Right. third generation warfare, that's kind of what we're more used to in tactics wise. Third generation warfare focused on late modern technology that was about speed and maneuverability. The Blitzkrieg during World War II. That was kind of the first idea of third generation warfare, where you have heavy equipment moving fast, outflanking each other, and kind of cutting off different parts of your enemy, and then isolating them and
crushing
them. Right. Fourth generation warfare is what we're talking about today. That's modern warfare today.
Okay.
So fourth generation warfare is it's basically decentralized forms of combat, blurred lines between civilians and combatants, and it's kind of like Vietnam, Operation Iraqi Freedom, those types of war that are more of a counterinsurgency war than they are, two specific groups, combating one another.
Right.
So the tactics for fourth generation warfare are, quite a bit different. So what we're talking about with that, we're talking about cameras, we're talking about drones, communication encryption, and that sort of thing. So whether you're in Virginia and you're worried about what the government's going to do, or whether you're Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, all these kind of wars that we're involved with now are what we're talking about today.
Right. That is that true fourth generation, and different style than what America's been used to, really. But I guess, our younger kids have kind of grown up with it now,
Right. Right. And, you can see a lot of these tactics are used in, they were used in Iran on the Iranian people when they had those big riots a few weeks ago.
Yes.
They've been using it in Venezuela, in Hong Kong on their own. Most of these are on their own civilians, governments on their own civilians.
Right. And that's how it plays out. It seems more often than not. And even, the wars that we've been fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's kind of been the majority of the population against a massive army, where it kind of is like, the same thing as if you're fighting your government kind of thing, because it's the organized military against a civilian / militia population,
Right. And a lot of the stuff that's used effectively by governments and by the bigger armies fighting this type of warfare is modern technology, tracking social media, tracking, leaders of insurgent groups, using cameras and satellite pictures to watch, groups and figure out what they're doing before they actually strike. And it's a lot of it is about intelligence,
right?
And how well the insurgent is able to circumvent intelligence really dictates how they survive and handle that.
Well, I think, it even kind of goes back to like the principles of, Sun Tzu and the Art of War and understanding it. These principles hold true throughout time, and it's really about outmaneuvering. And by understanding surveillance and how they're monitoring, social media and everything else, it can be used as a tool to also throw off the scent of, an oppressor. There's a lot of different things, that you can do, but also being aware of what you say, what you share, and, telling everybody who you are and what you're about. It's a fine line between standing up for freedom and defending it and basically making yourself a target,
Right. Right.
And that's the balance, I guess, because you don't want to be a coward and give up on freedom. Because if we're all afraid, I mean, that's how, the German government under the Nazi regime were able to control the people. And that's how the Russians were able, because people were too afraid to organize or talk to anybody or speak their mind. And that's when you get into trouble. But on the flip side, you don't want to tip your hand, That's
right. And a lot of the time, they use these tactics to keep people from speaking out, to keep people from reacting, and silence becomes consent at a certain point.
And also, I think you run into a big problem where when you're not openly saying it, the people feel like they're alone in their opinions. Oh, well, I must be the only guy who likes guns anymore, because nobody else, anywhere I go, they're all, that they're all horrified at that and change the subject or walk away and are uncomfortable. And the only ones who speak out in the public forum are, people who are anti. Now, that's not so much in the public forums that we're in, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's how the culture has the big shift. And that's, when you're watching CNN or CBS or, any of these news channels, guns are such a taboo and shunned topic, as far as being pro-gun anyway. So you just have to be aware of, what you're saying, what you're divulging. And I think that's where the argument for well thought out arguments comes from too. Having ways to express yourself instead of saying, well, I have the right to carry my gun and you guys can't tell me what to do, but actually having a clear logical path. One is going to make it difficult for people to argue and use that against you. However, in the past, I have to say that oppressors usually don't like people who make well thought out arguments.
Right.
That they actually become, the key people they want to get rid of. Those are the ones who end up in the camps.
Right. You're the one on the top of the list. When you're somebody that speaks out about government fairness or about whatever it is that you're upset about,
Yeah. But another thing, I mean, with countries like Iran saying the stuff that they're saying, I mean, it's pretty crazy. They could, I just don't see them being effective, but there are so many little things they could do that could really disrupt us. And, it doesn't take a lot to disrupt the infrastructure. And so it is very concerning. Like, I don't think, they can send a military over here and really be a threat to us. But our infrastructure is weak and vulnerable. And to an EMP, that's a very dramatic and dangerous thing that could really, but also computer viruses or, oil refineries or, all these different things. We have vulnerabilities. I know there was a big documentary on, Discovery Channel or the History Channel, and they just talked about America's vulnerabilities, and it's like, as far as infrastructure, and it was kind of meant to spook you, but.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I've been hearing about Iran lately is their advancement in cyber warfare.
Right.
And, that's a big part of the fourth generation warfare is cyber warfare. If you can shut down water systems and power grids and things like that, the truth is, working in that kind of environment, I see all sorts of loopholes, all sorts of backdoors, easily getting in and out of these systems. Half of these things are protected by passwords that say admin or, shit like that.
Yeah.
Where people just don't bother to update it. The new guy comes in and you know what? it's just all the same. Look, this is the password. It's admin here, admin here. You
Yeah.
know, 1, 2, 3, 4 on this to get in. You know, there's a series of about, you know, probably 200 different types of codes that get you in 90% of computer systems.
Right.
Can shut down all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I work for a large company, and they basically same type of thing. You know, they you know, the passwords are clearly obvious and not well thought out, and it's just you have so many people sharing it. There's so much that we become complacent. And obviously companies are worried about corporate espionage and things like that. But it doesn't matter. I mean, it's what are you going to do? You have the masses and whatever. If you have 100 people and they don't care that much, that's where you get into trouble.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about what's his name?
Well,
Qasem Soleimani.
Right.
He was Iranian general.
Yeah.
You want to touch on him real quick?
Sure.
Now, they had a few incidents with an American contractor being killed, riots outside the U.S. Embassy by these Iranian-backed militia groups.
Right.
A lot of terrorist activities, taking place over there. And Donald Trump was talking about it and upset by it and threatened to do something about it. And what's his name? The supreme Iranian dictator, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Yeah.
So he basically responded with a text saying you can't do anything about it. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood where it was common.
He's a New Yorker,
talk shit, get hit. You know what I mean?
And that sounds
he
right.
talked shit, he got hit. What do you want? There's nothing you can do about it except that, I guess. I forgot about that. That a lot of this shit comes down to pushing envelopes. Are you willing to respond to this? Are you willing to respond to this? Continually provoking, and then when you get a bloody nose, screaming about how you got hit. Well, stop talking shit. You know?
Exactly. No, and that's the problem is that for a long time, prior to Trump, America's been sending signals that, hey, we're going to keep taking it on the chin,
Right.
And it's not even just America. We want to say it's just that America was always the tough guy. And that's why America suddenly looks weak. It's not like anybody else is any stronger. It's just that America's always been the tough guy and who didn't take crap, had that John Wayne kind of attitude, and all of a sudden, people say, hey, I can keep pushing America, keep coming over and slap you in the face and be like, well, I'm not doing it now. Look, I'm over here. I'm back on my side of the yard. And so you can't do anything. And America's like, well, you are back on your side, so we're going to let it go because, I don't want to lose American lives and blah, blah, blah. But you can only get smacked in the face so many times. And then people start to say, hey, you know what? They're really weak. They're ready to be taken out.
Yeah, they're not going to do shit.
And
you're not going to do nothing. Obviously, you're not doing anything. Sometimes you have to do something about it.
And most likely, the way Trump reacted is the wake-up call that the world kind of needed to see, and that might be the end of it. You know what I'm saying? It could just be like, hey, you know what? America's not going to just keep taking it on the chin. And hopefully, that leads to, a little more respect in the world. I know that's not necessarily how it plays out, and I don't know. I mean, it really depends because the bottom line, Iran's a wild card. You're dealing with crazy. You can't put logic and reason into them, but it also doesn't mean that you let it go unchecked. You can't say, oh, well, they're a loose cannon. They might actually try and attack us, even though they know in the end they would lose. It doesn't matter because they're crazy. That's always been our problem with North Korea. You're like, well, how do you really respond? Because they're
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, and their only draw, or the only thing that they want is to stay in power. That's
Yeah.
really it. North Korea is never going to give up its nuclear weapons because North Korea's finally got a seat at the table.
Right.
They have people talking to them because
Right.
people are concerned about what North Korea is going to do. They're not going to give those up willingly.
Right.
And just like Iran trying to get nuclear weapons, once they get them, it's not going to be a positive thing for the world. We're
Right.
going to have one more doomsday scenario on the table, and it's not like they are still not denying the Holocaust. It's not like they're still talking well about Hitler. The shit that's going on in Iran is people are really upset with their government because they took that $1 billion or whatever it was the United States gave them to stop their nuclear program.
Right.
And they didn't invest it in the people. They invested it in, more, rusty AK-47s to hand out to, to militia groups in Iraq. They invested it in supplying arms to, militia groups in Syria. They didn't, they didn't improve the lives of of Iranians,
right,
at all. And if you think about the war between Iran and Iraq that happened in the 80s, Iran lost 1 million people. They don't have a problem killing off their civilians in combat,
Right.
as long as they stay in power, as
Right.
long as the government heads stay in power. So if you really want to make an impression, you have to hit at the head of that snake.
Yeah. And that's how you win wars. That's how you change hearts and minds. That's the whole
Right.
thing. Is you got to kind of go to the top and really make a difference. Little things to Iran.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Well, whenever we do something like this, in their mind, they're justified in retaliation and responding. They're like, oh, the rest of the world's going to see.
Right. How I've been acted, or
right. And they're going to say, I was provoked. How do I not,
Mm-hmm.
So
and it really is a war of information. And, that's how it works when it comes down to situations like Venezuela Venezuela and Hong Kong. Maybe you're not drone striking the heads of the movements, but you're arresting them.
Right.
You're moving them into places where you can't see them. In Iran, they just killed everybody that was protesting. So, that's
the other way to go,
Yeah, you could do that also. Just
Right.
kill everybody and you're
Wouldn't
right.
put it past them. Well, one of the best ways to prepare against stuff like that, I think too, that people don't consider is like one of the ways that I think that we had such a hard time in the Middle East was it was their territory, their infrastructure. They understood what was around them, what resources they had, where they could hide, what buildings had allies in it and what buildings didn't, and
Mhm.
that on the ground knowledge makes the insurgents so powerful,
Right.
That's, it's knowing where you're safe. Because America, they might have a map and say, well, here's where the grocery stores are and this is where this is. And these guys are our friends. But even when they are their friends, you don't know if they're your friends. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? So you're always on guard, always second guessing, always, debating intelligence, questioning what's real. And that's where it gave them a big leg up on us and why it became so difficult to go in and separate when you had to sort out good from bad and everybody's wearing the same mask,
Right.
That's what gets you into trouble. But I would say, understanding, being able to protect and defend your own area and your own life, it's important to understand what resources and what liabilities you have available to you. Some of the resources, think of the pharmacy or, hospitals, hardware stores, plumbing, food distribution centers, sporting goods stores, gun stores, farms, who your allies are, like I was just saying. The sheriff and police stations, those could be resources for you. Radio stations could be a resource for you. You know, all that communication stuff, municipal buildings with solar and things like that, that all are valuable assets. And some of those things you're thinking, well, the resources when they're open, but they're also resources after society breaks down.
After they're abandoned.
You know, when they're abandoned, nobody's going to haul away everything out of a Home Depot. Now, you may have people who take over the Home Depot and maybe set up some kind of bartering, whatever.
Right.
But somebody's probably not in the first week or two going to take away 200 sheets of plywood and, and these are things to, if you're thinking and using your head when things start falling apart. And I'm not talking about just looting, but I am saying when resources are completely gone and things. And like I said, I really don't mean go loot from people. I'm just saying when there's nothing there, and if you know where to acquire stuff, even if it's through legitimate barter and trade, then you're going to be better off. Now, I also mentioned liabilities. So think about like where the prison is that's nearest you or the county jail. Think about like nuclear power. And we discussed, on an episode how to prepare for that. Think about the trailer park that might be up the road. That's a liability, because you got a large concentration of desperate people. If you live near government or project housing, that's a liability.
Right.
Unless you have a secret army there, I don't know, but I know in my case it's a liability. But also, it goes back to, what Kevin was saying, and just being really careful about what you say on social media. Don't tell people all your plans, what you have. There's nothing wrong with, having an opinion, although it may cost you a little bit with your freedom. But, it's not wrong to have an opinion. But like I said, you don't have to completely tip your hand, and you don't have to be as obvious of, who you are and whatever as some people are, Yeah.
And I think, I think that's one of the things. I think it's important to kind of trade knowledge, trade information, as far as learning how to be more prepared, talking to your neighbors, talking to your family, talking to, everybody else. Just make sure that they've got a little bit extra set aside for, whatever's coming, and have the ability, and just basic abilities like changing a flat tire and jumping a car. Basic common sense stuff that, maybe your 17-year-old daughter doesn't know how to change a tire. And it's not a big deal because you got AAA. But it wouldn't hurt to know how to change a tire. You know what I'm saying? And that goes for a million other things that we teach our kids every day. We go over with our family, with our friends. It's important, that sort of stuff. Food preservation. If the power goes out and your refrigerator is full, what's going to happen to that food? Is there a way that you can save some of that stuff before it's just rotten and your whole kitchen, stinks like a dump? A lot of that sort of stuff is really important when it comes down to how prepared and how competent your family and your neighbors are.
Right. Do you know how to make moonshine? Well, then what are you going to do when the liquor store closes?
That's right. You
got to realize.
Go back and listen to our moonshining episode and start building your stills. That's going to be money. Everyone says it's going to be bullets. I think it's going to be whiskey.
It's whiskey. You'd be happier that way.
Yeah.
Nah, it's trouble. But be aware of what you say. But like I said, also be aware of your resources. And, when we talk about preparing, it's also about preparing, we say get the food, get the supplies, get the solar stuff, get the stuff that might survive an EMP or that's protected in a Faraday cage or, resources that you have put away that you can fall back on. Well, part of prepping is if you're worried about the government taking away your guns, then are you preparing for that? Are you, if you're worried about 30 round magazines becoming illegal, are you preparing for that?
Right.
I don't know what preparing means to you. Maybe it means you're not spending your money on them and you're using your money to buy food. That might be one way you could go. Or maybe you do something else. I don't know. But I would say now is the time to prepare. The world is changing. And if, your idea of preparing is not buying 14 AR-15s and putting them in your house, then maybe that you should stop buying them and save that money to use on things that comply with your government.
Right.
And you should be doing that.
And if you're worried about what people are, about people watching you, and you're worried about people keeping an eye on what you're doing, what's legal today might not be what's legal tomorrow. And it isn't always grandfathered in. A lot of us think about this sort of thing. And yeah, it's a good idea to maybe stock up on some of these things that might be illegal next week. But some of those things.
What you were saying? Because I was saying that
just because.
Not
well, what I'm saying is just buying the things and having them might be a good tactic, but at the same time, you might lose all that stuff complying to government laws.
Yes.
And, maybe you should focus on food. Maybe you should focus on, what they don't ban a lot? Ammunition. They don't grandfather a lot of that shit in. Like, you can only have 100 rounds in your house. They do that some places. The United States is still all right. But maybe having 15 AR-15s is not going to be the same situation.
What if I only have 2? Or what if I have 25? You see, it could go either way.
It could go either way.
Right. It's a sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
What if I have 0?
Yeah.
What
if you have 15 AR-15s and 0 snow shovels? Maybe you should think, reconsider your plan a little bit.
All right. But what I am saying is now is the time to think. Now is the time to prepare. Decide what you want out of life and, plan accordingly. And, prepare. That's what I would say. Be ready. Be resilient. Be a prepper, And like I said, honestly, now is a good time to make sure that your food stores are in order and that you do have supplies. Maybe some of that night vision, it's getting really cheap right around now, I got to say. Now night vision scopes, $6.99, somewhere in that neighborhood. Sometimes there's a sale, $5.99. I'm just saying.
Sliding down. It used to be $2 or $3 grand you're looking at for one of those.
And you can, not so shabby. Body armor. I know I've been sharing some nice, really cheap sales.
I'm still looking for body armor for my dog. I feel like one that's like really the risk taker,
I think you need the Tannerite stuffed dog that you throw out in the living room and ship your dog in the back,
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. If you don't mind blowing up your kitchen, the wife might not be happy about a dog stuff with Tannerite.
Tannerite in the kitchen.
What are you gonna do? To
each his own, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
But it's really a good idea to learn how to be unpredictable.
I think that's right. Changing up what you're doing. Look at ways. I think another thing that's very important is to look at ways to communicate. One, ways to monitor, to listen to radio conversations and be aware of what's going on is huge.
I've been looking at police scanners lately, and they're not very expensive.
And starting to understand it and check out what your local, information things are and things you can learn there is really a cool thing for a prepper and, something you might really, find a way to really benefit yourselves. Then if you really can get into radio stuff, there are ways to communicate and to, do different things where, I don't know, you can share information easily. And because I think it's that isolation is how they hurt people. I think that's what, makes us weak is when we're isolated. And I think if you have ways to communicate and stay informed and understand what's really going on, it really changes people's morale and the tide of things. And I would just say, find ways to communicate securely and see if you can't step that up a little bit, because now would be a good time to start looking into those options. Well, it's free for Americans to do so. That's what I would say.
And I know there's a lot of people at home right now screaming about ham radio licensing and that sort of thing. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit more on a future podcast. But communication is really a big part of that. And communication encryption is a big part of that.
Yeah. No. And there's some good stuff out there. So, if it's something you're into, take a look around. There's stuff, that you can figure out. So anyway, I think that's about what I got. You got anything else?
That sounds good to me. Now, if you guys want to go to our Facebook page, how do you access the Facebook page if you haven't been there, Chuck? Is it?
So the page, if you just go to facebook.com/preppingbadass, you will find us. Also in the search bar, if you search groups and look for the Prepping Badass group, you might find other like-minded patriots in there. And, there's a lot of great people in our group, and we always have some great conversations. And I think, you guys might really appreciate it. So if you're looking for other like-minded folks and want to kind of stay informed about what's going on in America, we try and keep you there. Obviously, you have to sift through the weeds sometimes. I don't know where in America that isn't the case. But, any news channel, you got to kind of do a little bit of your own research and decide what's fact and fiction. We try and keep it in the area of fact. And most people usually jump on anybody who's too far out of left field. But, hey, do your own research and whatever. But at least you'll see the other side of the argument.
The Survival and Basic Badass podcast is a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.